So in this video, I'm going to be using a visual to discuss the masculine and feminine energies. And in order to explain it a little better, I love to use visuals, and it really helps to understand things. So here we have the masculine and the feminine traits. And they're not gender specific. They're just considered quote unquote masculine, quote unquote feminine, right? The active traits are considered the masculine traits. Those are things like giving, right? And a passive trait is something like receiving. There's no action behind it. You just receive, right? And when they are in balance, when they are balanced between masculine and feminine, and these cups are completely full, we give and receive equally, right? We give and we receive in a relationship. If we overgive, sometimes we attract someone who takes. And sometimes if we take, then we attract someone who overgives, right? So that's why it's so important to have these in balance internally. And people often get this confused because they're like, if we're balanced between masculine and feminine, then are we all the same? And the answer is no, because we all have an essence underneath that. Once we find a balance between all complementary opposites, then, which is what the masculine and feminine are, right? All complementary opposites like giving, taking, speaking, and listening. Speaking is an active trait, listening is a passive trait. So we have all these complementary opposites inside of us, and when we find that balance is when we have our healthiest relationships, right? So ideally, we want both of these cups to be completely full. We want to have a full blue cup and a full red cup. But the problems happen when someone like this, in this scenario, the feminine cup is not fully complete, because this person has anger and resentment and fear of the feminine, right? So they don't want to be feminine at all. They're like, I'm not feminine. I'm gonna take some of this feminine fluid, the red fluid, and put it into the blue cup and overflow the blue cup, right? And what do you have? You have this overflow, which is feminine energy with a flavor of masculine energy. So it's the wounded masculine or the toxic masculine, right? This person doesn't treat the feminine very well, doesn't treat women very well, gets emotional and anger outbursts and angry and complaining about work and obsessed with politics and gets emotional about politics. So it's a feminine emotional energy with a masculine flavor. You get that guy that like you can say like Mike Tyson, right? When he was younger, he was very masculine. You see like, wow, but he was scary masculine, that you wouldn't want to be around him at that time period, because he was a little scary, and he would get emotional and then he could beat you up, right? So that's an example of a wounded masculine or toxic masculine, where it's actually feminine energy trying to be poured into the masculine cup, and the masculine cup overflows, and you can see it's blue and red. It's a feminine energy with a masculine flavor to it. And then you have this scenario. And by the way, a man can be wounded masculine, and also a woman can show up as wounded masculine. And you'll see in the next scenario, when I talk about the wounded feminine, that a man can also show up as wounded feminine, So in this scenario, you have someone who their feminine cup is completely full, and they have resentment, anger. A lot of times it's anger, like in this example, the anger towards the feminine, and in this case, the anger towards the masculine. A lot of times it's unconscious, and it just shows up. It's demonstrated in your life, and in very subtle forms sometimes. Sometimes it's very subtle, the anger that someone has. And on the surface, they're like, I love the opposite sex. I love, women, or I love men. But then unconsciously, there's a need to control them, and a need to force them to submit in a subtle way. But sometimes it's not so subtle. Sometimes it's obvious, like in the case of like Mike Tyson, right? So this person has an anger and resentment towards the masculine, so she tries to be more feminine. And so she tries to pour this masculine energy into the feminine, and now you have this overflow of the feminine cup. And now it's masculine energy overflowing with a flavor of feminine, right? So this can look in the wounded feminine or the toxic feminine is instead of receiving, like the divine masculine gives and the divine feminine receives, right? And the goal of the inner power couple, which is the concept I teach, is to have all these in balance and have them like married in the center. You see, the giving and receiving is in the center. But then when receiving gets out of hand, and it becomes a little active, it becomes a little masculine. Receiving is a passive trait that has no action behind it. It's just putting your hands out and receiving. That's a feminine energy. And if you're receptive, you can receive things from God, from the universe. You can receive blessings and abundance. But then when the receiving energy becomes a little bit masculine because it's wounded feminine, just like in this example, it starts to take. And taking has a little bit of an action, right? You can go and take something from somebody. These are people who are energy takers. These are people who manipulate. These are people that are coercive. That's a feminine energy that becomes active, and it becomes a little bit of a toxic feminine. Again, it's masculine energy being poured into the feminine cup. The feminine cup overflows with masculine energy, but it has a flavor of feminine. So like this, the masculine here with the flavor of feminine was more emotional outbursts and violence, right? Aggression. This is more passive aggression. This is an aggressive energy, but manipulation, coercion, trying to take someone's energy. Sometimes people take your energy, right? You're not giving them, but they try to take it. And that's why boundaries are so important. That's why it's so important to have the masculine energy and honor both, which is what I teach in the inner power couple, right? Is bringing those, if you imagine this as a teeter-totter, right? You want the masculine and the feminine in the center and married. And this means you've dealt with your judgments and your anger and your resentments towards the masculine, your judgment, your anger, and your resentment towards the feminine, and you honor and love both and see the beauty in both. We need masculine energy. How else are you gonna take action in your life? How else are you gonna speak up for yourself? How else are you gonna set boundaries? That's the masculine energy. How are you going to protect and provide for yourself? And how are you going to know what you want if you're not in touch with your feelings and, how your intuition and you might be at a job that you hate, and those feelings are important so that they use them as fuel to take action. The masculine comes into play and takes action and gets you out of that job and finds a better job, maybe starts your own business. So it's really important to honor both. And when we start to When this guy is angry at the feminine and doesn't like the feminine, has judgments and anger towards her, he tries to go this way. And he becomes forceful. Instead of giving is a masculine energy, then you can force yourself on people, right? That's what rape is. Rape is forcing someone to receive what you are not wanting to give them. Speaking is a masculine energy, and listening is the feminine aspect. But you can over talk, and you can dominate a conversation. You can force others to listen, and when they're not wanting to listen. You can speak to people when they didn't sign up to listen to you, right? So that's when it's important to learn how to give and receive equally, love and honor both the masculine and feminine, and have both your cups completely full. And then once your cups are completely full, which is what yoga is about, right? Yoga is about the chakras, and I'll do another video of the chakras and which ones are masculine, which ones are feminine. It's every other one. Spoiler alert. The goal is to balance those. And in yoga we have the kundalini, which is the dueling serpents. What do you think those are? Masculine and feminine energies. When you find your natural balance, that's when you find out your essence. When you're just being authentic. Children they don't know enough yet to hate the masculine or hate the feminine before they were abused or before anything happened to them. So they just flow authentically. They just do what they want. They play, they don't judge anybody. They play with girls and boys. It doesn't matter. They just play. It's when we start to judge that these things get out of balance. And then once we find our natural balance in these energies, then we find our natural essence. And if you think of a car, right? A car has two wheels on this side, two wheels on this side. It looks symmetrical. It looks balanced. But not every car is the same, right? You might have a pickup truck. You might have a race car. You might have a luxury car. You might have a classic car. You might have a bus that's meant to transport people. So every car is balanced, but they're not all the same. They have a different essence. And in humans, that tends to be testosterone, estrogen, biology. Our biology gives us certain predispositions. So a woman with more estrogen is predisposed to be more of a nurturer and a caretaker. Doesn't mean it's always that way, but that's generally what happens with estrogen. Masculine energy, testosterone, they're more aggressive, assertive, they like competition. So that once you find your natural your natural essence and your natural flow. And that's when you find your natural, what your essence can come through, your real essence, your real truth. And that's the goal of the inner power couple. This is everything. Imagine this person, the toxic masculine, his feminine cup is half empty. So he's craving someone who has this scenario, has extra feminine toxic energy to fill his cup for him. So this would be blue and red here. This person has excess, and she needs his masculine energy because she hasn't developed her action and taken action in life. So she needs his excess masculine energy to fill her cup, and that's where the toxicity comes out. Because these things are shadows, these are blind spots. He has blind spots of feminine energy. He's disowning his feminine, so his feminine shows up as blind spots, as shadows, right? And these shadows want to be loved, they want to come to light. And that's where toxicity comes in relationships. These people will she'll fill his cup, he'll fill her cup. They're a perfect toxic match together, but they both have shadows and they both want to be loved for who they are. So again, this is the purpose of the inner power couple, is to balance these so that you don't become codependent. You don't need someone to fill your cup. He doesn't need someone to fill his cup. And you don't become codependent, you just become more empowered and magnetic. This is fear. This overflow is from fear, and his overflow is from fear of the feminine. This overflow is from fear of the masculine. Now to backtrack a little bit, you can have a woman who's in her wounded masculine, who's forceful, and who doesn't know how to receive, doesn't know how to receive in her divine feminine. And she's always in the giving and gives because that's the only way she knows how to receive, right? She gives forcefully in order to forcefully receive. She really wants something from somebody, so she overgives in order to receive. And that's being in the masculine. That's being forceful in order to receive, giving. So as you can see, and then a man could be in his wounded feminine. He could, be hurt by the masculine growing up. A lot of times, I had a little bit of both. I had a little bit of wounded masculine, wounded feminine, that's another video where there's both a little bit overflowed and half empty. But sometimes he was wounded by the masculine. And so he gets into his wounded feminine and tries to take tries to take energy and tries to take from people, tries to manipulate, tries to play like push and pull dating games. That's all wounded feminine. The masculine in dating is more like forceful and doesn't get the hint and doesn't know when to stop pursuing and chasing, right? So that concludes my video for now. I can go on forever. This is just a kind of a brief explanation of what happens internally, and I hope this made sense to you. If you're interested in hearing more about my inner power couple, there will be a link in the description to my website, and I look forward to sharing more of this with you. I have a course you can purchase on there as well to learn a little bit more about this and how the inner power couple works internally. We all have this relationship internally between our masculine and our feminine, and when there's anger and resentment towards the opposite sex, it shows up internally, and we can fix it right here. We can create a conscious relationship between them, and they are the parents to our inner child, right? They provide and protect for the inner child. They listen to the inner child's emotions, the feminine energy. And when they are fighting, they're not being a good parent to the inner child. So it's very important to balance these energies inside of us because they are also the parents to our inner child. And we have a family inside of us that when we empower ourselves, we become very magnetic, becomes very attractive. You don't need anybody outside of you as much, and you can argue that when you start to do that for yourself, you just become more magnetic. People, there's not a needy energy. There's more of like this is just who I am, and this is what I do in my life. And people sometimes want to join that because it's very sexy. There's not a fear and a neediness behind it or a forcefulness behind it. Thank you for watching.